Welcome to Keto Meals and Recipes.com. Today I'm making a keto peanut butter bread based on a 1932 Depression-era bread recipe. I would like to thank Glenn and Friends Cooking Channel for the inspiration for this keto peanut butter bread. I changed the original flour-based recipe so that it's now keto, grain-free, and sugar-free, and it's also vegan. This is a very easy recipe with just a few ingredients, most of which you probably have at home already. The texture of this bread is moist and actually quite light, with a very tasty, light, salty peanut butter taste. In fact, it actually tastes like you've already spread the peanut butter on top of the bread. And it goes perfectly with my cooked raspberry jelly, like I'm doing here. Or you could spread some blueberry syrup or jam on top. During the holidays, when I have my orange cranberry sauce, I like to spread some of that on top. And lastly, my son really loves the keto peanut butter bread with some of my Keto Nutella. Whether you like to have it bare or with one of my toppings, I'm sure that if you like peanut butter, you will love this tasty bread. While I'm making this bread, and as an extra little bonus, I will give you some historical information about the origin of this recipe. And when I've completed the recipe section, I will also provide some information about Lupin flour that you may find interesting and is important to know before you start using this flour. The macronutrient ratio for this peanut butter bread is 2:1, with 4.7 grams of total carbs, 2 grams of soluble fiber, 0.3 grams of insoluble fiber, resulting in 2.4 grams of net carbs per slice. Here are 3 ingredients that you may not have at home and you will need for this recipe. I know many will ask, but yes, you must use the whole psyllium husk, not the powder version, because it'll completely change the texture. And you also have to use a granulated, not a liquid sweetener. And of course, you'll also need the Lupin flour. If you absolutely cannot get the Lupin flour, you can substitute with coconut flour, but the macros will be slightly different, as well as the taste will be different. So I hope you do try it with the Lupin flour. By the way, the link for any product I mention, other recipe videos, as well as the written recipe for this peanut butter bread are all posted in the description below. So go check them out there, please. And before starting, please weigh out all the ingredients for best results. If you're new to keto cooking or cooking in general, and you don't have a lot of equipment, you'll love this recipe because all you really need is a mixing bowl, a fine mesh sieve, and a spatula. So begin by placing your fine mesh sieve over your mixing bowl. Then drop in the almond flour, the Lupin flour, the whole psyllium husk. I'm using my Lakanto monk fruit sweetener that I ground to a fine confectioner's powder, and a gluten and aluminum-free baking powder, and salt, which I also ground to a very fine powder. Then, either with a spatula, whisk, or just using your hand, stir the dry ingredients so they pass through the sieve. This process will help to aerate the more wet and clumpy almond flour, as well as combine the ingredients better. As I'm doing this, let me tell you a bit about the history of this recipe. This peanut butter bread recipe was first published in 1932 during the Depression era by the Red Rose Flour Company in a cookbook they published, 5 Roses Flour, A Guide to Good Cooking, which, by the way, is a Canadian company. The flour company asked Canadian housewives to send in their favorite recipes, and they chose the appropriate ones to make the cookbook. As a result, this cookbook also provides a little bit of a commentary on how people lived during that era. This cookbook was republished from time to time, and each time the cookbook was updated, it also gave a historical glimpse of how families lived in that particular time period. In this 1932 cookbook, because it was the Depression era, and there was a shortage of some of the ingredients, and people needed to be more economical, you will notice that there are no eggs and no shortening in this bread recipe. Instead, the recipe uses smooth peanut butter as the binding and fat for the bread. Also, all the ingredients in the original recipe were pantry items most families would have had at home during that period. Since my recipe does not use wheat flour, you may have to get a couple of the items if you don't have them at home already. Okay, now that everything's passed through the sieve, it's time to pour in the unsweetened, unflavored almond milk. You will notice that I'm adding the almond milk in 2 stages. That's because I want to show you what the correct texture for this bread dough should be like. So, use your spatula to thoroughly combine the wet and dry ingredients. Having done that, add the smooth peanut butter and fold to combine. This bread will taste slightly different depending on your peanut butter, so try to get a really good quality organic peanut butter. And when you're buying your peanut butter, I would like to remind you to please read the label. Make sure the jar only contains organic ground peanuts and no other additives. I've also changed this recipe a little bit for our taste by adding a bit more peanut butter. And that's because I wanted more of a peanut butter flavor, not just a hint of peanut butter. But if you do want your bread to be less peanutty, reduce the amount of peanut butter you're using to 1/2 cup. As you can see now, the batter is very thick and tight. This is not the texture we want. And if your dough is at this stage, you definitely need to add a bit more almond milk. So now I'm going to add the rest of my almond milk and fold it in. This is a much looser and better texture for the batter. The correct consistency is halfway between a bread dough and a pancake batter. Everything is well combined, and it's now time to pour the batter into my parchment-lined loaf pan. And just use your spatula to level off the surface. As you may know, non-glutinous dough does not rise very much when it's baked, so whatever shape you put it into the oven, that's the shape it'll come out. I'm going to place my loaf pan in the middle position of my preheated 400 Fahrenheit or 200 Celsius oven and set my timer for 40 minutes. When the timer goes off, before turning off the oven, test the bread with a toothpick. If it comes out a little bit wet, give it another 5 minutes. Then turn off your oven heat and prop the door open. But leave the loaf pan in the oven to cool slowly, about 20 minutes. Then take the bread out of the oven, remove it from the loaf pan, peel off the parchment paper, and let the bread cool to room temperature on a cooling rack. And when your bread has cooled completely, cut the bread into 1/2 inch or 1.3 centimeter slices. This bread is really tasty and amazing all on its own, but as I said, I really like it with my cooked raspberry jelly, or any of the other suggestions I made earlier. With this raspberry jam, this tastes exactly like a very light, slightly salted peanut butter and jam sandwich. And each slice with the topping makes for a wonderful filling breakfast, or as my son likes it, a dessert after dinner or a snack when he's studying. I really hope you will give this simple recipe a try. And if you don't like peanut butter, I will soon be posting another bread recipe that uses a different nut butter. And I have found that for each recipe you do have to modify the ingredients a bit, so it's not a one-for-one substitution with another nut butter. Now for a bit of information about Lupin flour. I know that this may be a new product to many people who are on low-carb, keto, or gluten-free diets. I have been using and experimenting with this flour for about 18 months and found that it's a great substitute for coconut flour, which many people do not like the taste of, including some of my children. Here are some facts I found on the internet about Lupin flour. The link for my sources will be posted at the end of this video. First, Lupin flour is made from a legume called the sweet lupin bean. This flour is low in carbohydrates, high in protein, and rich in fiber. For those of us on keto, low-carb diets, you may be interested to know that the majority of the carbohydrates in Lupin flour come from fiber, and the flour contains almost no starch. In fact, Lupin flour is about 40% protein by weight. This protein density makes Lupin flour one of the most significant plant-based sources of protein. Therefore, using Lupin flour is a simple way to increase the protein content, especially for those who are on vegetarian or vegan diets, or for those who are exercising and wanting to build muscle. Other benefits of Lupin flour, as noted in the article I read, are that Lupin flour may increase satiety and thus curb hunger cravings, so it's a good ingredient for those wanting to lose weight. Now for some cautionary points. Lupin flour has a very strong taste, so it's best to combine Lupin flour with other types of flour, like I did with my almond flour and whole psyllium husk, especially when you're baking. And the other reason you only use a little bit of Lupin flour with your other ingredients is Lupin flour is still a somewhat hard to get ingredient, And because this is a fairly new product, it's a little bit expensive, but well worth the price because you should only use a little at a time. Now here are some very important facts I would like you to know. Since lupin flour comes from a legume, lupin allergy is thought to be similar to peanut allergy. There's also a certain degree of cross-reactivity between lupin and peanuts, so individuals with peanut allergies may have a higher risk of experiencing allergic reactions to lupin. I know it wouldn't matter in this recipe, but in other recipes where you're not using peanut butter, it may be an issue, so please consider whom you're feeding this to. I also read that according to a recent randomized control study, a small but significant number, about 4% of the children who had peanut allergies, also were allergic to lupin. Here are the links that I used for my references. I hope that this information about lupin flour has been useful and interesting. Thank you very much for watching my video. I love corresponding with you, so please leave me a comment or question and share the link to this video recipe with a friend or on your social media. And most importantly, I hope you'll come back and check out my next video when it's posted. Until then, have a wonderful day. Cheers!